My name's Kate and I live in Belper in Derbyshire in a housing co-op, currently with 9 other adults and 3 children. I'm going to talk a bit tonight about my experience of living somewhere that flooded back in November 2019, and we've come scarily close to flooding twice since then, once only a few weeks ago. So when I tell people about living somewhere that floods, I always feel like I have to justify why I chose to live on a floodplain. Our co-op bought the house and land back in 2012, just on the outskirts of Belper. The land and views are really beautiful. We've got 69 acres, we're managing it for conservation and also use it for gatherings, camps, community fundraisers. The River Derwent runs only 2 fields away from the house, so the summer involves plenty of wild swimming. When we moved here, we spent over 10 years searching for an affordable property. None of us had any money. The only reason we could afford where we live now was because it was situated on an ex-landfill and is on a floodplain and needed years worth of building work doing to make it habitable. So from the outset, we knew there was the possibility of the land flooding, but we knew that the house hadn't flooded since 1969. And since then, the land immediately around the house had been raised. So we thought it was really unlikely the house would take water, except in an extreme flooding event. Most of us have been involved in climate activism for years, and we knew that global warming was going to increase the likelihood of extreme flood events. I guess even if you believe something, it sometimes still takes it actually happening to you to make you realise it's actually true. In November 2019, after a few days of heavy rain and a soggy autumn, the land was already saturated. The night before we flooded, we'd got a flood alert, but we weren't too worried as we'd had those before without any bother, so we all actually went to bed. And about 2 in the morning, we got calls on our phones. This time it was a flood warning, which means flooding is probable, take action. But in the middle of the night, any meaningful action seemed impossible, so we all tried to get back to sleep. At 6 o'clock the next morning, the rain had stopped and we were still under the impression we would be able to go to work. But within minutes, we realised that the water levels were changing before our eyes and the water was flowing the wrong way. Instead of down the hill and across the land to the river, the water seemed to be flowing uphill. Garden chairs started to float past the window as we were watching. And after that, everything's a bit of a blur. We had no plan because, as stupid as it sounds, none of us really thought it would happen, at least not for many more years. So we had everything to think about and all at the same time. So first of all, we needed to get the children out of there before the waters got any higher. I remember shouting at my 9-year-old that he needed to pack a small rucksack of overnight things while he was distractedly insisting on checking flood levels and the weather forecast. We also had a 6-week-old baby and a 2-year-old in the co-op, as well as my 9-year-old. So the mother of the little one suddenly found herself trying to pack essentials while persuading a toddler she needed to get dressed and comforting the baby at the same time. So we didn't really know how high the water was going to get or how fast. I can remember really trying not to panic the kids while at the same time just wanting to cry with frustration. So eventually me and my housemate carried the kids out, and by then the water was just below the tops of our wellies. As we struggled up the hill, I remember thinking just how weirdly silent and eerily beautiful everything was. The sun was sparkling on the water all around us. I also felt overwhelmed that we were evacuating in total safety. I remembered all the footage I've ever seen of refugees fleeing with children in their arms, surrounded by floodwaters and in the middle of war zones, maybe being shot at the same time. It was a weird time to realise how unbelievably privileged we were. I could step just a few metres up the hill and absolutely know that however inconvenienced we were, our children would be totally safe and friends and neighbours would shelter us. So it was even more surreal at the top of the hill. As we made our way to the nearest friendly farm, we passed someone using a leaf blower to tidy up their front drive in the morning sunshine, as if nothing was happening. It seemed crazy that for them, nothing was. And it made me think about what an amazing metaphor that was. The minority world worries about blowing leaves off their courtyards after a stormy night, while so many in the global south are literally drowning. So the amazing farmer let us shelter in his living room to feed the baby, and we called a friend to come and pick up the kids. I knew my son would be totally fine, so I headed back down the hill to help the others. So as I got back down into the entrance to our place, I was met by a boat. My housemates had got the old rowing boat out and they were using it to evacuate the chickens without filling their wellies. So we stuck around for the next hour, moving food and valuables off floor levels, turning off the electricity, and doing whatever we could to think of to make the property safe. And by then the water was in most of the buildings, and we'd got everything that we could off the ground. So it seemed like time to evacuate, and reluctantly we left our home to its fate with a cat in the basket. We spent the rest of the day trying to find a way over the river to the other side of town where the kids were. Finally, we managed to sneak over the cordoned off bridge and spent the night all packed in at a friend's house. When a few of us ventured back the next day to survey the damage, it was really surreal to find that the waters had totally gone. It was a complete mess, but the water had just totally retreated. We all managed to move back in within 2 days, but obviously the effects of the flood lasted a lot longer. The lane is the only direct access point to our house, and it stayed underwater for 3 weeks, even with pumps running day and night, which meant getting to school and work became a real mission. And then there was the putting the house back together. Some people's spaces were much worse affected than others, and it was only a couple of spaces, including mine, that had miraculously escaped water by less than an inch. So we spent weeks with the help of amazing friends and volunteers from Belper's Flood Hub, ripping out soggy carpets and sofas, sorting through damaged items and skipping most of them, and cataloguing everything for the insurance claim. People then had to live for 8 weeks with industrial dehumidifiers, with their unrelenting noise, and waking up each morning totally dehydrated. And when the dehumidifiers were finally gone, we had to find new furniture, replace the flooring, and somehow put our lives back together while the rest of the world had gone back to normal. So since that November 29, we've had 2 further flood warnings, one in February 2020 and one just a few weeks ago in January 2021. Both times we now knew that we couldn't sleep through a flood warning, regardless of what time of night it comes through. When we had one just a few weeks ago at 10:30 at night, we then worked till 2 in the morning to get everything off the floors and to pack go bags. So now we've got a flood action plan. We understand a lot more how to interpret the information on river levels. We've got piles of bricks near all the furniture, cookers and fridges, so we can quickly get everything off the floor. And now the insurance money's finally come through, we can start buying proper flood shutters. So we're much more resilient, but there's always more that we could do. And we know that without being totally rebuilt, some of the spaces are always going to take water. And obviously the psychological effects are still there. My son asked if we're going to flood every time it rains heavily, and he started checking the flood levels site on his own when he's worried. I never had to worry about that kind of thing when I was 10. And the sound of rain on the bedroom window doesn't make me feel cozy like it used to. Now it pretty much leads to guaranteed insomnia. But I'm still aware we're massively privileged. When I'm feeling anxious and grumpy, and I was a few weeks ago, that we were having to think about flooding in the middle of lockdown, my partner showed me a picture. It was one of the refugee camps in Syria that same week, with tents surrounded by water. Yeah, war and water. I still can't compute what that would be like. So we are definitely not all in the same boat as each other. We're not even on the same seas. So I live in the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It's a valley where solar panels and wind turbines are frowned upon because of supposedly damaging the industrial heritage value of the area. It all started here, and who knows now where it's going to end. I do wish my son hadn't been born in times where he will find out just how bad things can get. And I wish that things that I'd ranted about since being an idealistic and pretty self-righteous teenager weren't now coming true. Anyway, thanks very much for listening.